From a speck of blood to the handle of a knife, the evidence would not lie to the forensic team. A suburban murder would lead investigators to discover a teen's hidden desire for murder. In San Jose, California, the Aquinos seemed like the normal family of three. 42-year-old Jay Aquino was the supervising manager of a well-known conglomerate. His wife, 33-year-old Jae Hee-sung, was his fourth wife since the death of his first wife, the mother of Rachel Aquino, a 17-year-old girl who was Jay's only child. Song had been working as a part-time accountant after immigrating from Korea in order to marry Mr. Aquino. She had been born there and lived there her whole life.
Very smart and hardworking. She had always a certain general gentleness about her, and I remember she had always excelled in math class.
It had been spring break, and Rachel was staying home with her stepmother. Jay was busy at work on the weekdays. On April 23, 2019, the two were at home alone. Jay came home around 5:30 p.m. He walked into the kitchen to find his wife on the floor, deceased.
When investigators got to the scene, it was confirmed she had been dead for 2 to 3 hours since the blood was crystallized and the serum had separated. The body was also stiff.
The blood on the walls were consisted of large individual stains from the middle to the lower wall. There had been only one deep wound to the neck, a severed artery. In between Jae-hee's fingers were strands of dark brown hair. On the counter, there was a 6-inch kitchen knife. There was also blood on the floor near the body and a blood trail to the back door. More interestingly, there were $20 bills scattered around the body. I can't even describe how I felt at that moment. I've never known anyone that could do something so despicable. Even more disturbingly, Rachel was nowhere to be found. Investigators feared that she had been taken by the perpetrator who had killed Jae-hee. However, they discovered that she had been with her close friend, Taylor Ramos, at his house before coming home to find the police and CSI at the crime scene.
As I was interviewing Rachel, she kept glancing at this cupboard in the kitchen. It was a little off-putting to me, and in addition, she didn't seem to have the reaction of a daughter whose mother had just been murdered. There was definitely a lack of tears.
Investigators immediately began a search for suspects. The security camera in the living room had recorded a heated conversation between Jae-hee and her friend, Hannah Kang, the day before. This was enough evidence for police to start questioning Miss Kang.
There seemed to be a conversation where both of them started yelling at each other, and Mrs. Kang walked out of the house.
During the interview, Mrs. Kang told investigators that they had reconciled the evening of their argument via phone. She also had an alibi. During the afternoon, she had been with her family on an outing. Her alibi had checked her out as well as her phone calls, eliminating her as a suspect. The police continued to interview any possible eyewitnesses, as the video camera was not working on the day of the crime due to a neighborhood power outage. One of the neighbors reported seeing two hooded figures running from the backyard and driving away in a black BMW, while he passed by with his dog. However, the eyewitnesses was not able to remember the license plate of the car. Police interviewed Mr. Aquino about anyone he suspected of holding grudges against Jay.
Mr. Aquino mentioned that Rachel and his wife did not get along very well, which brought her to our attention.
Rachel had never really gotten to know her birth mother, so at a very young age she had no mother figure to look up to.
With the constant change of her father's wives throughout her childhood, by her teenage years, Rachel began to grow resentful of her new stepmother. My wife constantly told me that Rachel would yell at her and throw things whenever she brought up her grades. I talked to Rachel, but she didn't seem to want to change her behavior. Jae-hee had forbidden Rachel from going out during spring break as a punishment for her behavior. This information was contrary to what Rachel had told investigators, which was that Jae-hee had allowed her to go to Taylor's house that day.
Taylor had confirmed that what Rachel said was true, so we ended up having nothing to go on from that point in time.
But that would change as investigators followed the clues to the victim's murderer. Investigators had come to a dead end to find a suspect and a motive. They turned to their last resort, evidence found at the crime scene. The first piece of evidence that had caught their attention was the knife on the kitchen counter.
We did perform a calcium test to look for the possibility of a murder weapon. The weapon was first swabbed with a moist cotton swab. Afterward, the Castle-Mayer formula was added to the swab. Finally, hydrogen peroxide was added. If the example was possible blood, a chemical reaction would occur and the swab would turn a fuchsia pink. However, we received a false positive. The swab immediately turned pink when we added the Castle-Mayer solution, so the knife was not a murder weapon.
There was dark brown hair found at the crime scene, but due to lack of the follicle, which contained DNA, investigators were unable to use it as a viable piece of evidence.
We were able to identify the hair as human due to the imbricate pattern of the cortex and the medullary index that was less than 1/3.
The oddest piece of evidence, however, were the scattered $100 bills.
After close examination, we discovered that the dollar bills were counterfeits. They were not made of the same material as real money would have been made. There were no blue and red fibers. The microprint was pretty blurry and the portrait looked flat and lifeless. Definitely not a valid dollar bill. We then processed to package the blood-stained counterfeit money in a paper envelope. Then we labeled the evidence as biohazard and signed and dated on the overlap.
Mr. Kino then informed us that recently his wife and Rachel got into a scuffle about money.
Jaehee had kept safe in her room to store money to send home to her relatives in her native country. When Jaehee wasn't there, Rachel would often go into the safe and switch the cash for counterfeit money. This happened often, and it caused a lot of conflict between them before. In addition to the conflict of money, Jaehee constantly pushed Rachel to maintain better grades.
When there's a stranger in your home telling you what to do, you bet that you're going to harbor a big grudge against them. And if you're anything like Rachel, you're going to be blood-boiling angry.
As police continued with the investigation, they began to go back to the information about the black BMW they received earlier on.
We did a search on local owners of black BMWs in the city limits, and about 5 came up.
The registered owner of one of the black BMWs was Joshua Ramos, who was Taylor's father, who claimed he had no knowledge about the location of his car and Taylor's whereabouts. This led to investigators following up with Taylor for more questions. They interrogated Taylor Ramos about his activities with Rachel Aquino on the day of Jaehee's murder, or if he had any possible alibis to clear him from the crime.
He told us the same story, so when we asked Mr. Ramos to have a look at the car, that's when Taylor started to look uneasy.
Inside the trunk were some clothes and a different knife from the one found in the kitchen. This one was coated in blood and had been wrapped with 2 t-shirts.
And that's when he knew there was something going on with Rachel.
When Rachel and Taylor were questioned yet again by investigators, they still denied involvement in the murder, but evidence found on the knife proved otherwise.
On the knife handle, we found 2 different fingerprints that we collected with tape. Then, we continued the evidence packaging by placing the fingerprint in a small envelope, which was tightly sealed. We then signed and dated the seal on the overlap. The fingerprints collected has shown that one fingerprint had a tinted arch pattern with wrinkles, while the other had a double loop whorl pattern.
Investigators then proceeded by collecting samples of Taylor's and Rachel's prints to look for any similarities in fingerprint patterns, minutiae, and other scars that could further implicate their involvement with the crime. After the process, professionals concluded that one belonged to Rachel Aquino and the other to Taylor Ramos. After the fingerprints, we knew there was more evidence that could convict one of the possible suspects of the crime. We decided to analyze the blood on the knife. We proceeded by collecting the blood sample on the knife with a cotton swab, and then continued to place it into a porous container where the blood was tightly sealed. Then, we signed and dated the seal on the overlap. Lastly, we labeled the container with a biohazard label to indicate any harmful substances. Afterwards, we packaged the bloody knife in a sterile rigid container where it was sealed completely and signed and dated on the overlap. We also put a sharp and biohazard label. We proceeded to analyze the blood type of the blood in order to gain further leads. We did so by placing the blood samples into 3 trays of different antibodies. One was anti-A antibody, and the other one was the anti-B antibody. We added an additional anti-Rh antibody tray. Only the anti-B antibody agglutinated, and so it was concluded that the blood was type B negative. And in addition, the blood found on the knife was type B negative blood, the same type of blood as Jahi. On further DNA analysis, investigators concluded that blood did match Jahi and the knife discovered at the crime scene was the one used as the murder weapon. At this point, I was dumbfounded. I was in complete denial. Investigators had returned to the crime scene after they obtained a warrant to search the house for more clues. Little did they know, after rummaging through the whole house, hidden away in a cupboard was a journal. After collecting photographic evidence of the diary, we then proceeded by placing the diary into a box where it was tightly sealed. And it was signed and dated on the overlap. Evidence tag description indicated the location of the diary, which was in the higher cupboard next to the fridge. Lastly, the chain of custody was placed in order to be given to the handwriting analyst.
In this journal, there were multiple entries about this hatred toward Jahi. They said she could go to hell and rot for all eternity.
But that wasn't all the journal contained. They also wrote about stealing money from Jahi's safe and replacing it with counterfeits. The handwriting of the journal was compared to handwriting samples of Rachel from her schoolwork.
Dear Diary, today was the worst day ever. In forensics, we had a quiz that I failed, but I really did try my best. I should try staying up just to study for it. When I got home, my stepmom yelled at me, which was even worse than usual. She was already upset that day, and that test added more fire to the flame. When I got home, she ended up taking away my iPhone and laptop for 2 weeks. She really doesn't understand how it feels like to be me. She's so stupid. I just wish she would die. Why did she have to come into my life and ruin it even more? There will be a day I will get rid of her for good.
After going over the samples of the whole Aquino household, investigators did conclude that they were written by Rachel. In both samples, the lowercase d's were written with a very short top tail, and similar loops to the A. The lowercase o's were connected at the top, and weren't particularly tidy in the connection. In both, the spacing between periods and words varied from 1.5 to 2.5 millimeters. Also, in both pieces of evidence, no matter the messiness, the writer stayed inside the lines. This concluded that the murderer would be Rachel Aquino. With all the incriminating evidence against Rachel, she was taken into police custody where she took a plea deal. Rachel told investigators that on that day, she had taken counterfeits to sneak back into the safe. As she came into the house through the back door, Jaehee stood in the kitchen, cutting potatoes on the corner. Seeing the money in her hand, they both got into an argument that quickly turned physical, scattering money all over the floor. Feeling angered, the two got into a brutal fight. Rachel, seeing another knife in the kitchen, grabbed it and swung at Jaehee's neck, severing her artery and disabling her. As Jaehee bled out on the kitchen floor, Taylor came in. In a panic, the two juveniles changed their clothes and took the knife, stuffing it in a shopping bag. They then tried to escape the scene. In a panic, they furiously ran to Taylor's BMW, where they stuffed all the evidence in the back of the trunk. Yet they failed to notice the presence of the oncoming neighbor who was walking her dog. She then reported them to the police later on. As a result, Rachel Aquino was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Taylor Ramos was also convicted of aiding and abetting the murder of Jaehee Song and sentenced to 3 years in prison.
This case wouldn't have been solved without modern forensics today.
Now that this case has been solved, we hope that we have finally brought Jaehee to justice and peace for her family as well.
What do you think you're doing? Go study. You have such low grades this semester.
It's none of your business.
What's that inside your pocket? You've been taking money from me again. Gamja Ajala.
I hate curry.
It's my house, so you're going to follow my rules.
I hate your freaking house and your stupid house rules. Your food tastes like and your face looks.
What did you do?
It was an accident, I swear. Help me clean up, we're getting in trouble.
Give me that. Let's go.
Wait, what?
It's my house, so you're going to follow my rules.
I was.
You live in my house, so you follow my rules.
Oh no. Shouldn't I be screaming?
What the?
Was the worst day ever. Why do all you guys? You mean this?
No, I'm talking about this. You've been stealing money from me again. Gamja Ajala. Done it?